So the sun has a blazing glare that overpowers anyone who would look upon it directly. And it's overwhelming, and it lights up everything, and everything is very brightly visible in the sunlight. Whereas the moon, the light of the moon at night is gossamer and diaphanous and gentle. It does light up the landscape, but very gently and suggestively rather than explicitly. So there's something implicit, subtle, fine, and ethereal about the moonlight. And it gives us a very different feeling. It's one thing to bask in the light of the sun, which is warm and strong, and another thing to be out at night in the darkness, but somehow within this silvery light. It stimulates the imagination. Poets are profoundly affected by the moon. It can also encourage disordered imaginations. And sometimes this is true of poets. Some poets find themselves disturbed. Mir Taqi Mir, the great Urdu poet, describes how he went through a great heartache because his family disapproved of his marrying the woman he wished to marry. And then he began to stare at the moon at night and see visions of a feminine figure descending, and he found himself more and more incapacitated, and his health broke down, and it was only after some time that he came back fully to his senses and became functional again. But this is suggestive of that word that we have in English, lunacy, which is that the imaginative evocations that the moon produces can potentially, in the extreme, result in a kind of derangement of the mind. But the deepest and most coherent and profound poetry draws upon that same effusion of subtle meaning and elegance from the moon and assimilates it. I'm thinking of a saying of my grandfather who said, "I am the wine of the Holy Sacrament, and those who drink it and cannot assimilate it will be beside themselves and will be subjected to the mockery of the world. And those who can assimilate it will be illuminated." So the moon has this ethereal light that it balances the light of the sun. And alternately, there's a kind of excess that can result from superfluity of sunlight, the light of the sun, out of balance with the light of the moon. And we won't go deeply now into that pathology, but it has different consequences, ones that tend to exacerbate the superego and to enervate all kinds of forms of rigidity and judgmentalism and domineering tendencies. Of course, the sun itself is a brilliant angel of illumination, but these forces, the passive, gentle, elegant, diaphanous light of the moon and the bold, bright light of the sun, which tends toward the explicit, the rational, the clear-cut, these two things need to be balanced in our psyches. And so to receive moonlight and to receive sunlight, to assimilate them both, in our Sufi path to say the prayer Som, but also to say the prayer Salat, these things balance each other. And already we've alluded now to the third aspect, which is the receptivity of the moon. There's a Greek word kenosis, which means emptying oneself out. And we see the moon doing this all of the time, and we experience it in our own life when we breathe out. And if we don't breathe out, we can't breathe in again. It's the out-breath that empties us and prepares us to receive something anew. And this is what the moon shows us. It keeps emptying itself. In the Gaian we read, "Full moon, where will you be going from here?" Into a retreat. Why do you take a retreat after fullness? To make myself an empty vessel in order to be filled again. So it's so important to be able to clear impressions, to empty oneself, to drain out the residues, and to become a chalice, a clear, empty cup. And only then can more be given. But if we keep clutching at what has been given before, there's no space in which to receive. And this is crucial for a disciple on the path of discipleship to be a murid. And all of us, if we're following this path, we are murids. That means to not come with a fixed idea, not to come with a whole host of concepts and biases and prejudices, and then look for confirmation of them. If one wants to become a disciple, it's a different way of learning. It's a matter of totally opening oneself. Now, of course, we have to be careful not to be gullible, and that's why seekers are encouraged to take care and be critical and approach even sacred subjects with a certain amount of deliberate judgment. But then there comes a time when that kind of scrutiny and suspicion becomes a block on the path. And if one wants to become a true disciple, then one has to be ready to just receive. And it's not only what comes from the teacher, ultimately receive what comes from the divine source without twisting it to match one's expectations or presumptions or prior experience. And that's a very splendid mode of consciousness, the ability to be totally receptive to what is shining forth, the tajalli of this day, of this moment, and not trying to put it in a box and not trying to interpret it according to some other theory, but to be totally aware of this moment and receive it. And that's what the moon teaches. And so the moon really can remind us of what Ibn Arabi calls the private face. That is to say, we have a face that is constantly gazing at its source, at the essence. And there's a level of being where our being is not a fixed thing, it's not solid, but what we call our being is continuously renewed by the gaze upon us from the infinite. So that place, that you might say, that fountain head at the source of one's being, where you're face to face with the one, the totality, and you receive from it. That is the nature of the moon. The moon has its face to the source of life, and it empties itself continuously in order to keep drinking in the light that is given to it. So we have the words eros and agape to describe different kinds of love. And eros means the love that goes out and wants what it wants and takes what it wants and enjoys what it wants, and it's let's say active in that way. Whereas agape is a different kind of love. It's the love that waits and watches, that loves from a distance, loves in exile. It's the passive kind of love. So the eros is more solar, agape is more lunar. The moon teaches us the love of agape, which is to be a witness, to wait, to be filled. And the lover, in that sense, the moon is the archetypal lover. It receives the beauty that it is shown and takes it into itself as the moon takes in the light of the sun. And the moon is, in our Sufi metaphysics, is associated with the color white. Now, white is reflective. Black absorbs, so the akhva, the highest center, takes you into transcendence. It's like a black hole. It absorbs light. It sucks up light, and you find yourself in the beyond. But white, the color white, reflects. And this is the nature of the Latifa Ruhiya in the right side of the chest, and it's associated with the moon. Latifa Ruhiya is lunar. A fourth aspect of the moon is its dedication to the earth. This is something that isn't stressed as much in the ancient sources because, again, the idea of the earth as an orb circling the sun wasn't a widespread idea. So the moon and the sun and the planets and the stars were all seen as similar bodies. But we know now, of course, that the moon circles the earth while the earth circles the sun. Now, what Ibn Sina does point out, although he was working with the Ptolemaic model, but he does recognize that gravity, the gravity that makes the planets circle, is a species of ishq, of passionate attraction, of love. Gravity is a kind of ishq. So think of the moon in its circling of the earth. It's bound to the earth by love. And it's hard to deny that. And the significance of that, if we were to look out from space, just imagine looking through the solar system, just seeing how the earth circles the sun so faithfully, so much dedication, and then look around the earth, this faithful moon continuing to make its orbit just all the time, looking toward the earth, constantly paired with the earth. So there's tremendous love in it. And what does it do for the earth? Well, Murshid says something that might sound a bit paradoxical to you. It certainly sounds paradoxical to me, but it has a deep meaning. He says, the moon balances the power of the sun. If it were not for the moon, the sun would burst into flames and set the whole universe on fire. If it were not for the moon, the worlds would break into pieces and the cosmos would scatter. So the moon is doing something relative to the sun. It is taking in the sunlight and rendering it to the earth in a manner that is assimilable. In the same way that the cool light of night balances the fiery night of day, we need both of these forces. And the raw power of the divine being is of such intensity that it would shatter the world if it would be completely unveiled, if it were not moderated by, if it were not mediated by something lunar. And what is that something lunar? Well, of all of the angels, the angel that is most traditionally associated with the moon is the angel Gabriel. The angel Gabriel is said to live in the moon, or that is to say, the lowest sphere closest to the earth, or in the highest sphere. So Gabriel mediates, Gibril mediates. And who is Gibril? Gibril is the angel of revelation, of inspiration and revelation. Sometimes Gabriel is called the soul of the prophet. The prophet's own soul is this angel that receives the divine revelation. And we receive revelation through the prophet, through the prophets. So that revelation is important for us because, yes, the divine guidance is everywhere, but there's something about the nature of the prophet that humanizes that guidance and makes it available to us. You might say cools it and makes it knowable to us. And this is a lunar function, and that's why the moon becomes symbolic of the prophet. Now, the interesting thing is the moon rotates on its axis, and at the same time it rotates around the earth. And because there's an evenness in those two rotations, there's a side to the moon we never see. It always has this one face to the earth. There's a dark side to the moon. And likewise, there's a dimension to the prophetic soul that is not readily apparent. The prophetic soul isn't only contained in the words the prophet delivers. There's an inner life to the prophet. And so the prophet is not only a Rasul, but also a Waliullah, an intimate knower of God. And analogously, there is always an aspect to our own life that isn't outwardly shown. But sometimes someone gets a glimpse of it, and when we get a glimpse of that in another person, it becomes a very special kind of communion. Something that can never be put into words.